Welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report. Today I'm joined by Vance, founder of My Latin Life. For over a decade, My Latin Life has been helping gringos like me navigate life in Latin America. We talk about the trend of outsiders moving to their region since 2020, contrast to life in the US and Canada, and the role that crypto has played in this migration. Welcome back to Brazil Crypto Report. I'm joined today by Vance from My Latin Life, who has fled Canada and is now living the dream in Latin America and is helping gringos do the same. Vance, it's really great to have you on the show.
Thanks, man. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So why don't you give yourself a proper introduction here and tell us what you're up to, how you ended up in Latin America, why you fled Canada, and maybe what you're up to now.
Yeah, sure. So Vance is a mysterious, semi-anonymous figure, and really it's because I think there's a little bit of Vance in everyone. I think a lot of people who are still back in Canada, US, they're kind of daydreaming of being Vance one day, making their way to Latin America, working online, getting multiple passports, learning Spanish. And so there are people kind of early in their journey and they're dabbling and we want to inspire them. And then there's also people that are further along the way, like you and me, where we're, expats and digital nomads. We've kind of figured out how to make money internationally, make money online. But My Latin Life is your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. We basically help gringos, Americans, Canadians, Europeans move and establish themselves, relocate to Latin America, lower their taxes, and explore the entire region of Latin America.
Very cool. And then what's the genesis of this? Like, how did you find yourself just relocating, fleeing Canada and moving to Latin America? What did that process look like?
Yeah, the inspiration was basically escaping winter, right? Winter is brutal. It's basically 6-7 months of the year where you're barely going outside. You're basically just watching Netflix and you're not living life at all. And it's really putting life on pause. And it was always my goal to escape winter. Where I'm from, a lot of people had second homes in Fort Lauderdale or down in Florida or Arizona or Palm Springs or something like that. And that's kind of how the boomer generation did it. They were snowbirds, which was a term that was coined. And I think this new generation, now we're just much more international because it's just much more ubiquitous in terms of international flights. Making money online was obviously the hugest game changer. And we're just, the world's flat. We have a more globally integrated world now. And we've kind of taken it to the next level where instead of wintering in Fort Lauderdale, we're wintering in Mexico or Costa Rica or somewhere exotic and making life more of an adventure.
Cool. And talk about the snowbird trend is super interesting because I remember when I was a kid, when I used to live up in, the Midwest in the US where we also had pretty harsh winters. The snowbird thing was always something that was really only available to like the wealthier people. It was like the wealthier people would have like a second home in Arizona, or either they had the money or they had like a flexible enough job where they could go to, go hang out in like Fountain Hills, Arizona for 6 months out of the year, for example. And it's funny, like you go, I use Fountain Hills is because like a friend of mine lives there and outside of Phoenix. And it's funny, you go to Fountain Hills, Arizona, and it's like, you end up meeting all these random people from like my hometown. And it's all these people who are kind of, they're small business owners. They're people that are fairly well to do. And it was something that was really only available to, we'll say sort of like the upper middle class and above, right? Like if you were just an average person, you couldn't really like do that, right? Just because it was expensive and whatever. But it sounds like kind of from what you're saying, we're not just like democratizing the number of places available for people to go, but this opportunity is also available to more people just generally than it would have been before. Maybe talk a bit about how you see that.
Yeah, I think democratizing is a great word, and that actually came to mind for me as well. That's exactly right. Yeah, this is something that used to only be available to the rich or people on pensions, right? Because they were getting their pension and they didn't have to actually work, and then they're
Yeah.
but you only get that when you're 65, and so that's kind of the deferred life plan, as Tim Ferriss puts it. And but now you don't have to be 65 to go spend the winters somewhere warm. Now we're making money online. We're making more money than was ever possible through entrepreneurship and making money online and not being beholden to our local job market in the Midwest or whatever, where the upper cap was a couple $1,000 a month, right? So now, now what's democratized is being able to make money online and the location independence that comes with that, and then being able to go where you're treated best and kind of live around the world. So before 2020, this was really like there was only a limited number of digital nomads before 2020, and it was maybe a couple specific careers. It was software developers, maybe some writers or authors or something, maybe some graphic designers or something, but it was a more limited set of careers that were able to make money online. There was obviously also people who worked for, multinational companies who were expats and things like that. But in terms of like truly location independent, there was not too many between 2010 and 2020. 4 Hour Work Week came out in, I think, 2007, if I'm not mistaken. And I read that book in 2008, 2009. I read the 4 Hour Work Week before the 4 Hour Body even came out, which was Tim's second book. And so I knew early on for me that this was something I wanted to do for myself. I wanted to be location independent. I wanted that location freedom. I didn't want to follow the deferred life plan. I wanted to have more of an adventure with my life, right? And yeah, long story short, post 2020, this life path or this opportunity set has opened up to a lot more careers. Zoom and Skype barely existed 5 years ago. If it did, it was pretty bad. But now that like Zoom and Skype work, we have people that really have like no technical skills at all and aren't even good with computers who are making money online, and they're doing sales or they're virtual assistants or who knows, right? But it's really just such a large set of potential ways to make money online now. If you go to like a digital nomad hub, like whatever, Playa del Carmen and Medellin, something like that, and you go up and talk to maybe 50 different digital nomads or people in a cafe, everybody makes money online a different way. Like some people are marketers, some people, it's like a little bit of everything. It's kind of wild how many different ways there are to play it.
Yeah, and I mean, what was your impetus for actually? I mean, you mentioned the Tim Ferriss book was kind of the inspiration for this whole idea, but when did it finally click that where it's like, hey, I could actually just relocate and just do what I'm doing, in a different country and kind of improve my lifestyle, lower my tax burden, etc. I mean, did you spend some time in the region first and then figure out like, hey, this isn't that bad, or did you just have it determined in your mind, like I'm going to move to Costa Rica or wherever, and I'm going to do this thing?
I mean, it just seems so obvious when Tim presented it, right? It was like, okay, yeah, Philippines, like it's obviously paradise. I've still never been, but you'd be like, okay, Philippines, yeah, must be beaches and must be cheap as hell. And it was just like, that would obviously be better than winter in Canada. So it was just like pretty obvious in that sense.
Yeah, because for me personally, like I had always had, I mean, growing up in kind of rural Midwest United States, you kind of have these like stereotypical images of Latin America, where and it's like not necessarily the most flattering images, I guess. So I was always kind of like, ooh, that's dangerous, or
Right.
but then it finally clicked for me during COVID when my wife and I we came down to live in Brazil for half of the year just during COVID because everything in the U.S. was shut down. So we just came here, and it was like, wow, this is actually pretty nice. I could totally see myself living here for a longer period. And that was kind of like what clicked. Like I'd done a study abroad program in college before that, but that's not really like living abroad. That's just sort of you're just hanging out with some college kids and partying for 3 months. It's not like really, living by yourself abroad, right? Um, so that was kind of like the psychological barrier that was broken for me was when we spent that first 6 months, and I was like, wow, this I could definitely do this. Um,
Yeah, sorry, I kind of remember where I was going to go with it, and I think it answers your question a bit, which is like, you know how like it's kind of a rite of passage, the study abroad, or after you graduate, take like a gap year, and just set off with maybe $3,000 and go stay in some hostels. So I never wanted to do that. I never wanted to just set off with $3,000 and come home 6 months later broke with a hangover, right? I just I that never made sense to me because I had read the 4 Hour Work Week, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna figure out how to make money online, and then it's sustainable, and then I can live and travel as I please, right? And actually, for me, and so that's what I did, right? I got online skills and started making money online, and so I could do that. And for me too, man, Latin America actually wasn't my first pick. I was always like in the 2010s, we were always reading about how China was going to take over the world. So I thought maybe I'll go to China or something, learn Chinese. I thought, maybe I'll go to Europe and like live in Italy or something because I have a bit of Italian descendants. And so I thought I would do like something like that. Those were kind of my bucket list things I wanted to do. But I took one trip down to Mexico with a buddy, and I was just it was just so amazing. It was just so much better than Canada and the US in so many ways. Obviously, being like a younger single guy, like the party culture really appealed to me. How everyone was dancing and the music was better and drinks were cheaper. Then everyone was friendly, and it was just so much better of a like going out experience and social experience. And so that's kind of what originally drew me in. But as I've gotten older, I've stayed here and grown beyond the party thing for the most part. And I found other aspects of the region that I really like, be it like the food and the culture and all the rest of it. Because, growing up, where I grew up, there were no Latinos. I think maybe it's different for some people who grow up in maybe like Texas or something where they're already exposed to Latin culture. But when I was growing up, I was not exposed to it at all. So it was like a pretty big shock to me, and I love it. And I think I still have a lot of the childish love for Latin America still, for sure. Like when I hear like a Brazilian song, like my heart rate immediately jumps and stuff.
Well, it does have the effect of kind of unlocking, a corner of your personality that is, or maybe like activating part of your personality that is like otherwise inactive or dormant, right? Because especially in kind of upper Midwest where I'm from, culturally it's very closed, right? It's cold. People are very reserved. And ethnically, you have a lot of people that are from Scandinavia, from like Poland, those types of places. And it's just not. I mean, people are nice, but it's. They even have kind of a joke for it, like it's Minnesota nice, where you just like pretend to be nice to somebody even if you don't like them.
Are you from Minnesota?
I am, yeah, from Minnesota.
Okay.
So I'm honorary Canadian here, but it does. But like coming to Latin America and speaking the language here, I almost find it like it activates a part of my personality that like I'm not comfortable interacting. Like there's ways that I'm not comfortable interacting in English that I am very comfortable interacting in Portuguese, if that makes sense. Just because like you wouldn't in English, like you wouldn't like greet people like this or you wouldn't talk like this, but in a different language, it's like, oh wow, it kind of opens up this more animated part of the personality.
And let me ask you something: when you go back to Minnesota, do you kind of like bring some of these personality traits? Like you try to go for the kiss on the cheek, and people are like, "Whoa!"
Yeah, like people think you're crazy or something, or you get me too'd or something. It's great. It's like you just don't do that. That's just not how you, or like you don't. If you're eating dinner at the table with the family, and it's like, okay, you don't interrupt. Everybody has to wait for their turn to talk. And like the Latin family is just like everyone's just screaming over each other the whole time, kind of thing. So take a while to get used to that. Definitely took a while to get used to that. But you just kind of embrace it. You're like, hey, maybe this is, it's almost like I needed like permission almost to be able to like unlock that part of my personality where you're not like super reserved and like trying to be all proper and not offending people. But you can just, the Latino culture is much more of like, how would you say it? Like, it's just like you don't necessarily have to worry about offending people
Judginess.
or judgingness or people will just people will fight and then they'll just like make up for it later, or it's just much more open where like the upper Midwest kind of social style or the social contract, I guess, is more of okay, like you kind of just sweep your problems under the rug and then you only like litigate something if there's like a really big problem that you have to address basically. Otherwise you just kind of sweep it under the rug and move on, right? Which maybe isn't the most effective way of resolving disputes, but it's kind of how we did it.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of reverse culture shock when you go back, and I don't know, man. To me, it's like very zombie mode-ish. It's weird. I mean, I think to anyone listening to this that's thinking about coming down to Latin America, I don't. Maybe they listen to you more for the crypto side of things, or maybe like a little bit of both with the Brazil stuff. You got to do it because you're just so I wouldn't say sheltered. I would say kind of like stuck in this pattern of like not letting yourself go or not letting yourself like move your body and everything. And it's just yeah, it's a huge eye opener to go to Latin America and to start dancing and just like live like with more emotion.
One other thing I really like about Brazil, and I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but it's definitely a Brazilian thing where there's a very keen like it's a very like focused kind of economy, but people are also like just very perceptive to other people's needs in a lot of ways and like making
Mhm.
the other person like feel important and valued. So like you show up, so like as an example, say you're hosting, like a party at your house or something, or a small gathering at your home, and a new guest shows up, right? Like in Brazilian culture, it's like the standard is that okay, that new person shows up, everyone just stops what they're doing, you stand up, you go and you greet that person, and it's
Mhm.
like you're basically treating that person like they're like the king of England or something, right? Where like in the US, it's like okay, you show up and like nobody even like notices that you're there, and you feel like you're it's like you're like Patrick Swayze in the movie Ghost, if you, from back in the day, if you ever saw that, where he's like he doesn't realize he's a ghost and he's like going and trying to talk to his ex-wife and like but nobody can
Sure,
see
sure.
him. So you kind of feel like that where you show up and it's like, does anybody like notice I'm here? Or, like what's going on?
Hmm.
But so I really like that kind of like that warmness and that just attention to like how the other person is feeling, or making that other person feel valued and comfortable is just something that like Brazilian culture really brings out a
Hmm.
lot, which I appreciate. Um, but maybe let's maybe switch gears here a little bit and talk about like just practically like what does it look like for someone like yourself just like pack up and relocate? Like what all, I mean, obviously you kind of help folks do this, but like what all do you have to think about? Like what goes into that calculus?
Yeah, it's definitely different for a single person versus say a family of four, and we help both groups of people. Obviously, with the family of four, there's more considerations like school, healthcare is more important. Um, Other things like if you're, maybe you have a dog, maybe you have a house that you need to rent out or sell, you might have a car or two, right? So with the family of four, for example, there's a little bit more baggage, but it's nothing that can't be overcome. It's definitely still doable. And I think uh, maybe it's a tangent, but I think Latin America has something to offer every group of people at every stage of life. So for the single guy or girl, obviously you're going to have a way better life experience in Latin America than in say Minnesota, right? Um, and then for the family, I think Latin America has really a lot to offer a family as well. in terms of the lower cost of living, in terms of more family values, less woke stuff, more family support, for example, from your partner's, cousins and grandma and all that type of stuff. Like they're much more willing to help out and be babysitters and all that type of stuff. Less woke stuff in the schools. Activities are way cheaper. If you want your kid to be, the world's best tennis player or golfer or whatever it is, all those activities are going to be way cheaper in Latin America in terms of getting them coaches and things like that. More walkable areas. So I think that's just scratching the surface, but I think there is really a lot to offer the family as well. So I don't think it's just like a single guy's paradise or something. And then for the retiree as well, where they have maybe a limited amount of savings and they're trying to get by on fixed income or a pension. And again, Latin America is a no-brainer because they'll feel more healthy in a better climate. And healthcare in a lot of ways is much better in Latin America, where you actually get to talk to your doctor and you have their phone number, and you're not just a number. So you really get more time with the doctor, and it's less expensive. And you can stretch that pension income further and live without cutting corners, as well as for both the family and for the retiree. For example, having a maid, which is something we've talked about on Twitter a bit, how you can get a maid for like, $400 a month full time, 9 to 5 for about $100 a week in Brazil, in Mexico, pretty much any country. And it's such a huge help, not only for families, but then also for retirees, especially when, people really need that elder care. So I think that's like a huge thing. Like elder care in the US is so expensive. It's insane.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think at every stage of life, Latin America has something to offer people. Sorry, I know I kind of didn't fully answer the relocation question, but I think it's a good preface.
Yeah, well, I think the household labor question is something that I was like very uncomfortable with that first, right? Because like in the where I grew up, it's very sort of everything's kind of like independent, and you kind of do everything yourself, and you take pride in that. So the idea of like hiring somebody to come and like clean your house or something, I was like very uncomfortable with that. Like it just felt very like and you'd meet people, there's like some kids in my college who came from like Latin America, and it was, they talk about how we had like a servant at home or a maid at home or whatever, and you're like, oh man, these guys must be like filthy freaking rich to like have a maid at home, but then like here it's just like part of the culture, right? Like all the like in Brazil, like all the apartments, they come like if you look at an apartment, they all come with like a empregada room, right? Even though most people don't have like a live-in empregada maid, but like the apartments come like fitted for that. So it's just very much a part of the culture that but I found it very like uncomfortable at first, because I found it kind of like demeaning. Like, wow, that's kind of like demeaning to these people to be having them do like household labor or whatever. But that's just part of the culture here, and really in a lot of parts of the world as well. Like that's not. I think it's just kind of an American thing or a Canadian thing where this type of labor is
it's such a limiting belief. It's such a limiting belief, because like in every other aspect of, say, running a business, Americans are so advanced in terms of, okay, let's scale. How do we scale? How do we get venture capital and get to $1 billion? Okay, we got to scale. We got to hire slow, fire fast, blah, blah, blah. And then when it comes to our own households, we're like, you know what? I'm going to do my own dishes. It's like, what? Like, I thought we were all about scaling here, right? So it's actually a really great way to get a lot of your time back, and be more efficient. Like, there's no reason. I think it's hilarious that millionaires in the United States are going to the grocery store and looking like idiots, going up and down the city cereal aisle. Like, why do you not have someone doing that for you if you're a millionaire?
Yeah. And that's something that I've found very valuable is, because I don't particularly enjoy cooking, because I like the act of cooking. Like when I was younger, I used to cook in restaurants, and I actually really enjoyed that job, even though it was very hard, but I enjoyed kind of the creativity of it. But just like all of the, if you think of what actually goes into cooking, and you have like, okay, you have to go to the store and buy the food, and then you have to prepare everything, and then you have to actually cook it, and then you have to clean everything. And then if you factor in like the total cost of all that, you're like, well, is that really worth, am I really getting my money's worth out of this versus just going and eating at like a self-service place, like, or, getting some food, from that's pre-made at like a local restaurant or something, or having, hiring somebody to just bring the food and cook it, or just come to my house and cook it for me, and do all that stuff for me. And then,
Mhm.
and maybe in the US, okay, it's, eating out is pretty expensive in the US if you want to eat healthy. Um, but here, like I mean, I'm in, a fairly like expensive city by local standards here. And I can get a lunch. I had lunch today. I had for like $8, and it
Mhm.
was it would have taken me much, significantly more time and energy to like prepare that myself.
So you're in
And then
Brasilia, right?
yeah, yeah.
Do you have a maid?
So we don't. We have somebody that comes and cleans occasionally, but we don't have somebody who comes. She comes like maybe like once every 2 weeks just to clean.
Okay.
But we don't have like somebody. I mean, in Brazil, it's like a little tricky. There's some new labor laws that I think restrict the amount of like hours you can. Basically, if you're hiring somebody for more than like
Even
X amount
even
of
under the
hours per
table.
week, well, you could do it under the table, I suppose, but we haven't.
Yeah.
I guess we haven't
Well,
resorted to
I
that.
know
But
I know you don't want to make the whole episode about maize and stuff, but I'll hit you guys with like one or two more things, just because I think it's one of the biggest game changers in Latin America, and I've really had a lot of Canadian American families like tell me this. They're like, I was on the fence about Latin America, but when you told me I could get a full-time maid for $100 a week, holy shit! Like how much time that would free up for a mom who has like three kids. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So the mom was like, you know what? Now I'm more down for Latin America than the husband is. But just to like visualize it. So I wake up in the morning, the coffee's made. They bring two coffees to my office. I work and fast for like 2 hours. At 11 a.m., I have breakfast, eggs, handmade tortillas, handmade salsas, handmade green salsa, handmade red salsa, maybe some other stuff. Maybe this morning we had fried plantains, maybe some other stuff. Um, so that's great. And then we'll eat again at like 2:33, again, made by the maid chef. During the day, she's, making the beds. She's doing all the laundry. If there's any packages, she'll go walk to DHL and pick up the packages, or the Amazon or whatever. She'll do the grocery shopping as well. She'll organize when we need like huge, bottles of water. We call them garrafones. What do you guys call them? Gahafas or something? But when we need
yeah,
water,
Gahafa,
or
yeah.
when we need oil for the boiler, when we all the meat deliveries and fruit deliveries, the maid kind of organizes all those things. And so we have one maid Monday to Friday, and then we have a different maid on Saturday and Sunday. We used to have her do Monday to Saturday, but then I said, you know what, I want some redundancy, so we're not like 100% relying on this one maid. And then so we said, you know what, you do Monday to Friday, and then we got a different one for Saturday and Sunday, just so we're not like screwed if like one maid like
Right.
falls off the face of the
Leave.
earth or something.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, so huge lifestyle upgrade. And one other thing is I've tried to convince like single buddies, and I've been like, yo, just get a maid in here like once a week, dude. Like it'll cost you like 10-15 bucks, and be like, no, I'm pretty clean, whatever. And then I go visit their places, and their place looks like shit. Like the bathroom's like all dirty and shit like that. And like there's dishes in the sink and everything's disorganized and a million things. I'm like, dude, anyway, but so I think even a single guy could take advantage of this for sure. But that's probably enough about that for the episode.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a way to like upscale your life and just bring a lot more efficiency and get a lot of time back, right? Because the point you made is interesting, but like Americans are so good at efficiency and scaling things and whatever, but at home it's like, if you're, I mean, the easiest way to just sink a bunch of time is to have to, just sink your time into these like kind of daily household tasks that could be easily be like automated, or, you could hire somebody else to do or whatever. And look, like at the end of the day, like your time is the most valuable asset you have, right? For working or spending time with your family or children or friends or whatever.
For sure.
It's the most valuable thing you have. So anything you can do that gives you more time is like by default, a net positive in my view. Um, well, maybe let's turn the conversation to the crypto angle here. This is Brazil crypto report,
Let's do it.
and would be interested in. I mean, at least in Brazil here, there are a lot of entrepreneurs that are kind of building products that use crypto that are basically tailor made to like help gringos kind of navigate the Brazilian system here without having to necessarily get a bank account or without having to get like it is one of the tricky things about Brazil is that if you're not like if you're a foreigner and you don't really in my case I have family connections, so I was able to kind of get an inside a view on things, and I got my CPF number and everything. But if you're just a gringo sort of like showing up here, it can be kind of difficult to navigate, like just even paying for stuff with a card or whatever.
Right.
But there are some of these products that people have been spinning up that are designed to help gringos kind of navigate the payment system here without needing to get a local bank account. There's one guy interviewed recently who's got a whole thing where he plugs into the Pix APIs and you can send and receive Pix payments, but it just converts directly from USDT. So you can just keep all your money in Tether USDT and just send and receive via Pix, and you don't even need a bank account, which is pretty clever. But would love to get your thoughts on just how are you seeing people, gringos moving to the region, like adopting crypto or using crypto. Would love your, what from your vantage point, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I guess the first thing I'll say is there's a company called Bit Refill, and they've been sponsoring the My Latin Life podcast for something like 4 months now. So if you listen to our podcast, and I think even the one you and I did, if you the listeners check out, so Brazil Crypto Report guested on the My Latin Life podcast, and I think even that episode was sponsored by Bit Refill. And what Bit Refill does is it allows you to use crypto to buy gift cards that you can use in Latin America. And you can use those gift cards to make all different purchases in Brazil, whether it be your phone plan or gas or the Nike store. I'm sure in Brazil they have like hundreds of things. I'd have to pull up their website, but it's a pretty useful way to live on crypto. And one of our previous podcast guests was a guy named Joel Valenzuela. You should probably have him on sometime because he's been living on crypto for something like a decade and doesn't even touch fiat. And he lives 100% on crypto. And one of his main tools is using Bit Refill. And that way he gets these like gift cards and stuff and merchant balances that he applies to his Amazon and his like all his different expenses. So I think that's one really cool tool people can use for practically using crypto in Brazil and in Latin America at large.
And I know even with when you're moving across borders, different countries and things, there is, especially with Argentina. I feel like with Argentina, the situation is a bit more acute there, and people will find it easier to just swap into like USDT, but before you go into Argentina and just start paying for stuff with USDT there. Like even like my neighbor randomly a couple of weeks ago, I was over at his apartment and he had his like Binance. He had like I didn't know he was into crypto. Yeah, his computer's open to a Binance platform or webpage. And I was like, "Oh, you're trading crypto, huh?" And he's like, "No, I'm just getting some USDT for, I'm going to like Uruguay and Argentina and whatnot." So he was using he's not even into like speculate. He's actually like using it for like the payments use case, which is kind of like the holy grail of crypto is people actually using this stuff for payments, right? So I found that pretty interesting. But wondering if are there any other like easy use cases there that you've kind of come across, or are you? Is that a question you get a lot from people? Who you're helping to relocate here is like what's the role of should I be kind of having some I suppose it would depend on what market you're in, but is that like an issue or a question you're getting from a lot of folks?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I typically advise people is bring US dollars in cash, maybe about $1,000, basically as like emergency fund. Have a 0% foreign transaction fee credit card so that you can, use credit cards without paying transaction fees, um, and only certain credit cards have that functionality. And then also have a ATM fee reimbursement debit card so that you can get money out of the ATM machine and you're not paying ATM fees because they get reimbursed, and only certain cards do that. And I think probably the next level of what I should be recommending people is, I guess, have USDT and be able to do these crypto exchanges. And one thing I've been reading more about is people are using like OTC desks and
Mm.
like converting that way. I'm not very familiar with this stuff. Maybe you could educate me and the audience at the same time.
I'm honestly not super familiar with some of this either. This is a bit of a gray area. I haven't really been focusing as much on kind of like retail, just individual adoption. I guess I've been kind of focusing more on some of the B2B adoption side of things. But it's on my bucket list is to like actually go to Argentina or some of these places where you can go to these, you can go and just like pay for things with Tether. You can go and swap out using USDT. So that's sort of on my bucket list, but I haven't actually gotten to, like haven't actually like I've only kind of heard about these things anecdotally from people. I haven't actually like done these things myself.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I'm friends with a couple different people that do Bitcoin ATMs in the region, and they set up these Bitcoin ATMs, and then I guess you trade them your Bitcoin and you get cash out of the ATM. And they have that in Panama and Mexico and tons of different places. I think Latin America, different countries are obviously at different levels of sophistication in terms of crypto adoption, and then also like these sort of crypto to fiat swaps so that you have local spending money. Obviously, Argentina, I think, is one of, if not the most advanced countries in the region in terms of being able to do swaps with crypto to get some cash. I've heard it's like very very efficient there. Mexico is pretty good. Panama's pretty good. Costa Rica and El Salvador is pretty good. Brazil, you'd have to educate me a bit more. And then the other countries, like you can imagine that like Peru and shit is probably like a little bit behind, um, but it's definitely doable in a lot of the countries. And actually, even in my Telegram groups, people are like pretty frequently like messaging like, "Hey, who's down to do a swap and stuff?"
oh, really? Okay, so you have just kind of private parties just doing some of these swaps and things.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Moving on here, I'd like to talk a bit about like how do you find that this kind of this trend of like gringos moving to Latin America? I mean, is this something that local people like appreciate? Is this something that's like kind of a nuisance? I mean, I know there's kind of this stereotype. Maybe this is just like a Twitter X thing, but kind of this stereotype of like these like passport bros that just go to Latin America and hang out and do jujitsu and hang out at the clubs or whatever. Like, but it sounds like from your experience, a lot of your clients are like you get those types of like Chad bodybuilder, like type A, alpha male type guys. But then you also get like, retired people and just normal people with families and whatever. Just wondering kind of how do, how are people, how are these folks like all kind of fitting into the region, especially if maybe, people locally aren't maybe used to like this influx of there's certain cities that are probably used to it, like a Medellin, they're probably pretty used to, getting lots of gringos coming in, passing through. But
Uh-huh.
I don't know. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so many different thoughts. Uh, as housekeeping, am I remembering correctly? You do jujitsu too, right? Though.
Well, my wife does. I mean, I'm like a very elementary jujitsu guy.
Okay.
Very poor, not very skilled.
That's fine. I'm not into it either. I'm not doesn't really appeal to me, the like rolling on the ground thing. But I definitely play a lot of sports. I definitely do, the soccer, tennis, squash, basketball. Try to keep active every day. So gringos in Latin America. I think It's good to have like the historical context a bit. So like pre 2020, you probably saw two or three different archetypes. You had like super nerdy guys that were the lucky few that figured out how to make money on computers, and there were some of these nerdy guys going around the region. And I know a lot of my buddies who were around in that era. They were like, I can't even relate to these guys. They're just too like weird. And then you also had like you said, some type A guys who were like, life is an adventure. Um, the Chads that were going down to Latin America, and they were partying hard and having fun with it. And I think what we're seeing now post 2020 is more balance, where it's not just nerds and Indiana Jones types, but there's actually just like a lot more people who are kind of like in the middle and more like normal people, I guess you could say. And we're seeing all different types of people now. Like we're seeing groups of girls going on like girls trips as like a squad of 3, 4 girls. We're seeing tons more families. I can't tell you when I'm in Mexico City how many like gringo families I see. It's kind of crazy.
Mm.
But we're seeing tons of families are like going to Latin America now, where before people would just do all inclusives, right? Like 10 years ago, people would only do all inclusives. They do the all inclusive in Cuba or Dominican or Mexico, and that's it. They wouldn't leave the resort. And I think what
Yeah.
we're seeing now is probably due to social media and people kind of realizing that these countries really aren't that scary, and also that the tourist infrastructure is getting built out a bit more. And now that there's Uber and stuff, that more families are actually opting for a more quote unquote authentic vacation or experience, and they're getting off the resort and they're kind of like engaging with the real city and community. So I think I think these are all positive things.
Yeah, the all inclusive part is interesting because that was always my experience of from knowing people who were took a trip to Latin America. It was always like we're going to Cancun, and I mean you might as well just be in like Hawaii or like like a colony of America or something, right? If you're in
Mhm.
Cancun, and they it's just do the all inclusive thing, like you never leave the resort. You step out of the resort and it's like a different world. But they just go there, do the thing, and then leave, right? But in my opinion, I feel like Uber has because it was one of the big
Uber and
sticking points.
Airbnb. Uber and
Uber and
Airbnb.
Airbnb,
Because it makes it
like
so much less
really,
scary.
yeah, it just reduces so much of the friction. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
look, like if you've traveled in a foreign country before, like pre Uber, like you're guaranteed to have been ripped off by a cab driver, right? Like it's guaranteed, and or even trying to like just even find a cab driver is sometimes like, super difficult, right? And
Yeah.
then he rips you off, and you're like, well, this is terrible. But with Uber, it remove, especially if you don't speak the language, right? Like, well, how am I going to negotiate with this guy? I can't even talk to him. So both Uber, it removes so much of the friction from that, where I can parachute into any country, anywhere, and I can get around now, whereas before I couldn't, right? As long as I know, yeah, I know the address or whatever, I can get around. And I mean, I feel like that was like because it gives you kind of like the freedom to be mobile and the freedom to actually go and start doing things without having to just be stuck, waiting for taxis or trying to flag taxis. And it gives you the ability to be like you're not stuck if you don't know the language, I guess. If you're just parachuting into a place for the first time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's a lot of the democratization that we were talking about earlier in the episode.
So a couple of the questions for you here. What are some other things that you guys are typically like instructing your clients to do? Like people that come to you and they're like, "Hey, Vance, like really like this idea. Really want to move to X country." What are the other things like you're telling people to kind of how do they get their house in order before they do this? How do they make sure that they're set up for success if they're going to make a move like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. it really kind of depends on, like I said before, whether it's like an individual person or a couple or a family. And then it kind of depends where you're coming from as well, whether it be Europe or Canada or the US. And things are a little bit for all those different circumstances. Also, which country you're going to, because, you might be giving different tips and advice to someone going to Brazil versus going to Colombia or Mexico or Argentina, right? So there's a lot of things, but there's definitely pre-work that you can do when you're in your home country. As I mentioned, get the right credit and debit cards, build a bit of a cash, what do you call it? Like a cash safety net. Maybe I think selling your car is actually a big one. I know a lot of guys who came down to Latin America for like 2, 3 months, and but they still had their car back home, and it was just eating at them that they were spending almost $1,000 a month for this car that they weren't even using back in the States. And they're like, oh, I have such a sick car, can't wait to get back to my car and drive it. And I and I'm like, dude, like life is so much better here. He's like, yeah, but my car. And so I would definitely say sell your car if you're really looking to make the move. um I think some people try to go like almost to burn the boats, though, I would say, and they're like, I've never been to Latin America in my life. I'm going to sell everything and I'm going. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm down with that plan, but why don't you do like a 2, 3 week recon mission where it's not going to cost you that much money, dude? Like, you know, a round trip flight is really only like 500, 600 bucks. Why don't you go do a recon mission? Maybe do a week here, a week there, and just get a feel for it so that, and there's a couple of reasons that a recon mission is useful. One, it
Hmm.
makes things much more real and you kind of know what you're getting into. B, it can actually be very motivating. Like it's very hard to stay motivated for like 6 months straight with this kind of like vague notion of living in paradise, but you don't really know what it's like. But if instead you actually went to paradise, saw what paradise is like, saw how fun it was in the nightclub, saw how cheap the food is, saw how, life was like it was there and it was happening whether you're there or not, and your life is on standstill back in the frozen tundra of Minnesota or whatever, it'll actually motivate you to make it a reality and make it a reality faster, right? Like someone who's done a recon mission is going to make it happen faster than someone that hasn't. And they're just going to be like, oh, yeah, Netflix tonight, no big deal. But someone who's like done the recon mission, they're probably not going to watch Netflix because they're like, I need to get back to that shit as soon as possible. So I think, yeah, and for a lot of reasons, like you can do it sight unseen for sure, but I think in a lot of situations, a recon mission makes sense.
How big of a deal is the language barrier for people? I guess maybe two questions here. Like, A, how important do you think it is to actually learn the local language? And then B, how big of a psychological barrier is that to people? They're like, oh, I can't speak. I'd love to do that, but I can't speak Spanish.
I think it's not a barrier. I think it shouldn't prevent you from going to Latin America, whether it be Spanish or Portuguese. It's all very learnable. You'll be able to get by in the beginning, no problem, as we talked about with Uber and Airbnb, like and Google Translate and all these apps and stuff. Like it's really not a big deal at all. And then that's kind of I think that's one of the big adventures of Latin America is learning the language. I think it's like one of the best reasons you can have, because I think it's important to travel with purpose and not just, like a lot of people travel with zero purpose and they just spend their days, I don't know, like smoking cigarettes in a cafe and visiting churches and eating croissants. And that's not like really living, in my opinion. I think you really need to have purpose. And I think one of the best purposes, like overarching goals that you can have, is to make it your goal to learn the language to a conversational level, be it Portuguese or Spanish. And it's very doable. Like you can get to like a base level conversational in, 2, 3 months. Obviously mastering it is going to take, 3, 4, 5 years plus. I'm still not like perfect by any means. in Portuguese or Spanish, but I'm like certainly solid enough to, watch a movie without subtitles and get by and all this type of thing. So I think come down knowing nothing and you're going to learn.
And then, um, in your experience, just with the folks that you interact with, like, what are the most popular countries that people are looking at? Like, where are people, most excited to relocate to, or what are the most popular destinations?
Yeah, I think the relocation countries are slightly different than like the vacation countries. But for, so it's kind of two different lists, but definitely the big four are, the four most populous countries. It's Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina. Those four countries really capture a lot of the mind share. Costa Rica and Dominican are up there too, but yeah, the big four capture a lot of the conversation.
For relocations.
Yeah, for a bit of both. I mean, it's funny. It's ironic. Like we kind of recommend, like I think Central America is very underrated for relocation because it's so tax friendly and it's so close and stuff. But yeah, I think Mexico Me- Mexico is definitely number one for both vacation and relocation.
Got it. Got it. And then, I mean, is this a trend? This whole relocation, is this a trend you expect to really see continuing, or is this something that was maybe just like a byproduct of this COVID induced work from home lifestyle that may be reversing at some point? I mean, obviously, we see a lot of companies that are like bringing employees back to the office and that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I
But
no, this is a long-term trend. I think it's still early innings, and I think every single day still in 2024, the news just keeps getting worse, and it just continues to reinforce that we made the right decision, whether it be the debt or the rising prices or the woke stuff or any number of things, the migrant crisis and all this stuff. So I think every single day it just keeps reinforcing the idea that we're making the right choice, internationalizing. I think there'll always be like what do you call it? Like a country of the day, right? There'll always be like some hot new thing. Whether it be right now Argentina with Milei or El Salvador or whatever. But long term, I think the whole idea of the nation state and living, growing up, dying, keeping all your assets in one country, I think that is really a legacy idea, and we're much more moving towards an international lifestyle where I call it an a la carte world where you have different aspects of your life and lifestyle in different countries. Maybe you make your money in one country, you live in a second country, you have your doctor in a third country, like all these different things. So it's much more, we're much more international now.
yeah, I agree. Definitely agree. It's hard to see that trend reversing here, just given the way that technology is moving and just kind of the way the state of the world is moving. Well, hey, Vance, really appreciate your time here. Thanks for joining us. And how can folks find you or get in touch with you if they have more questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks again for the opportunity and the great conversation. You can find us at mylatinlife.com, Twitter, My Latin Life on Twitter, really, really active there, and the My Latin Life podcast on all podcast players.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Vance. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.